April 8, 1943, 27,000 feet above Caen, France. The oxygen mask couldn't quite conceal Oberleutnant Ralph Hermiken's smirk as he watched the awkward silhouettes climbing slowly toward his formation through the crystal-clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190A-5. The seasoned ace of Jagdgeschwader 26 studied the American fighters making their first combat appearance over occupied Europe. "The enemies sent us flying milk bottles," he joked to his wingman, unable to contain his laughter at the sight of the bulky Republic P-47 Thunderbolts struggling for altitude. Below, 16 P-47C Thunderbolts from the 4th Fighter Group ascended in tight formation, their powerful Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engines straining under the aircraft's 7-ton weight. To the German pilots, accustomed to sleek Spitfires and agile Soviet fighters, these massive American aircraft looked almost ridiculous. Barrel-shaped fuselages capped by greenhouse canopies, wings that appeared undersized for their bulk, and propellers larger than anything in the Luftwaffe's arsenal. What Hermiken and his fellow German pilots couldn't have known was that they were witnessing the arrival of the machine that would eventually decimate the Luftwaffe's fighter force. Within 18 months, the same aircraft they mocked as flying milk bottles would become symbols of dread. Armed with 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns, the P-47 would soon produce one of the most terrifying sounds in German skies. The formula for destruction was already in those broad wings: 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a combined rate of fire exceeding 6,000 rounds per minute, enough concentrated firepower to tear a Messerschmitt apart in seconds. The transformation began that April morning when Major Donald Blakesley, commanding the 335th Fighter Squadron, spotted the German formation preparing to attack. A former Eagle Squadron pilot who had flown Spitfires with the RAF just weeks earlier, Blakesley understood something his men did not yet grasp. Survival in the P-47 required abandoning traditional air combat tactics. The Thunderbolt was unlike any fighter before it. While the Germans had built light interceptors focused on agility and climb rate, Republic Aviation had created something entirely different, a high-altitude powerhouse that used mass, engine strength, and overwhelming firepower to change the rules of aerial warfare. Among the 56 American pilots scattered across the French sky that morning were men who would soon become legends, future aces whose names would one day strike fear across the Luftwaffe. But on April 8, 1943, they were still newcomers in an untested aircraft, facing one of the most experienced air forces in the world, veterans hardened by years of combat over Poland, France, and beyond, Britain and Russia. The Americans had been in combat for exactly 0 days. This is the story of how industrial strength overcame tactical genius, how sheer production power and refined engineering combined into unmatched dominance, and how German pilots' laughter quickly turned to fear once they saw what synchronized Browning machine guns could do at 400 yards. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was born out of a moment of crisis in June 1940. As German fighters swept across France, Alexander Kartveli, the Georgian-born chief designer at Republic Aviation, received urgent orders from the U.S. Army Air Corps. They needed a high-altitude interceptor that could rival the Luftwaffe's best aircraft. What Kartveli ultimately designed, however, was a machine that went far beyond expectations. A massive aircraft that redefined what a fighter could be. "It will be a dinosaur," Kartveli admitted to his team. But a dinosaur with good proportions. The XP-47B prototype first took to the skies on May 6, 1941, shocking everyone who witnessed it. Empty, it weighed nearly 9,900 pounds, about 65% more than its predecessor, the P-43 Lancer. The enormous turbo-supercharger system, with complex ducting running through the rear fuselage, gave the aircraft a bulky, almost bloated appearance. Test pilots encountering it for the first time often asked the same question: does this thing even fly? Not only did it fly, it performed like nothing else at high altitude. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engine, an 18-cylinder radial delivering 2,000 horsepower, could maintain full output at 27,000 feet, heights where German fighters struggled for power. The exhaust-driven turbo-supercharger allowed the Thunderbolt to deliver sea-level performance in the thin, icy air of the upper atmosphere, where most engines lost efficiency. At first, not everyone was impressed. Major Hubert "Hub" Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group during training at Bridgeport, Connecticut, initially disliked the aircraft. His squadron suffered heavy losses, 18 pilots and 41 aircraft, as they learned to master the massive new fighter. Between September 1942 and January 1943, training accidents claimed dozens of P-47 aircraft. The Thunderbolt caused more American deaths in training than the Germans did in its first months of combat. It ground-looped easily during landings, torque-rolled on takeoff, and dove so aggressively that pilots encountered compressibility, where shock waves formed on the wings, locking the controls. But those who managed to tame it discovered something remarkable. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma who would go on to score 27 aerial victories, described his first flight by saying, "It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it. You aimed it." The first combat missions in April and May 1943 seemed to confirm every German assumption. The P-47 couldn't turn with the Focke-Wulf 190s, couldn't climb with the Messerschmitt 109s, and couldn't match their agility at medium altitudes. Luftwaffe pilots quickly developed tactics to exploit these weaknesses, attacking from below where the heavy Thunderbolts struggled and forcing turning engagements where agility counted more than firepower. Major Joseph Pips Priller, commanding officer of Jägerschwader 26, reported after his first encounter, "The new American fighter is easy prey. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a cow. Our men call them Indians, fat targets pretending to be warriors." Early results seemed to support his view. In their first month of operations, American fighter groups lost 14 Thunderbolts while claiming only 3 confirmed kills. British RAF pilots, observing from their Spitfire squadrons, discreetly suggested that the Americans reconsider their aircraft choice. Some even joked that the best evasive move in a P-47 was to unstrap and run around its spacious cockpit. Yet, beneath these early setbacks, something crucial was happening, something German intelligence failed to notice. The P-47s that went down had endured astonishing amounts of damage before finally falling. One Thunderbolt returned from a mission on May 4 riddled with 21 cannon holes and more than 100 machine gun hits, damage that would have shattered a Spitfire or Messerschmitt. Its massive radial engine, with no vulnerable coolant system, could absorb punishment that would instantly disable a liquid-cooled fighter. And when P-47s did bring their guns to bear, the results were devastating. The Thunderbolt's 8.50 caliber Brownings produced a deadly convergence zone that German pilots had never experienced before. Unlike early warfighters armed with rifle caliber guns or cannons with limited ammunition, the P-47 could sustain continuous fire for over 30 seconds, an eternity in air combat. The event that began to shift German perceptions occurred on June 26, 1943, over Lisieux, France. It involved 2nd Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron, in an encounter that would become legendary on both sides of the war. Johnson's formation of 48 P-47s was returning from escort duty when they were ambushed by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s from 2/JG-26, led by Hauptmann Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, the younger brother of the famous ace Adolf Galland. The Germans executed a flawless attack, diving out of the sun with a massive speed advantage. Johnson's Thunderbolt, flying at the rear of the formation, was caught in a crossfire from multiple attackers, taking severe damage in the opening seconds of combat. Over 20mm cannon shells exploded across his aircraft. The canopy shattered, hydraulic fluid sprayed across the cockpit, the engine cowling was torn away, and flames erupted behind the instrument panel. Johnson, wounded in the nose and leg by shrapnel and bullet fragments, tried to bail out but found the canopy jammed. A 20mm shell had exploded in the canopy track, sealing it shut. He was trapped in a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet. What happened next challenged everything pilots believed about aircraft durability. Despite no forward visibility through the oil-covered windscreen, a violently shaking engine, and sluggish, barely responsive controls, Johnson managed to level the aircraft and steer it toward England. The P-47 kept flying despite damage that would have turned any other fighter into wreckage. Then things worsened. A lone Focke-Wulf 190, flown by an unidentified pilot from 2/JG-26, spotted the crippled Thunderbolt limping toward the English Channel at less than 170 miles per hour. Historical research has never confirmed this pilot's identity, though several names have been suggested based on combat records from that day. What followed was one of the most remarkable encounters in air combat history. The German pilot positioned himself behind Johnson's P-47 and opened fire with 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns. Johnson, unable to maneuver, could only crouch behind his armor plate and pray. The Thunderbolt absorbed the entire cannon load. The German then repositioned and fired again, this time using only his machine guns. With his ammunition finally spent, the German pilot pulled alongside and looked over the mangled aircraft in disbelief. Johnson could see his face clearly, a young, blond man whose confident expression shifted to confusion, then awe. The German shook his head, gave a small salute, and flew off, likely out of ammo. Johnson's P-47 somehow made it back to Manston, crash-landing with its engine dying on the runway. His crew chief stopped counting bullet holes after reaching 200. One cannon shell had detonated inches from Johnson's head, another exploded against the armor plate behind his seat. The engine had taken direct hits, the control cables were partially severed, and 3 of the 4 main structural beams were shot through, yet the aircraft brought him home. The survival of Johnson's Thunderbolt sent shockwaves through both air forces. American engineers examining the wreck realized they had underestimated their own design. German intelligence, reviewing reports from Jagdgeschwader 26, initially refused to believe it. No fighter could endure that much damage and remain airborne, but testimony from multiple pilots confirmed the impossible. The Thunderbolt had survived everything the Luftwaffe's best had thrown at it. By July 1943, American pilots had begun mastering the P-47's real strengths. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke, commander of the 56th Fighter Group, learned through hard experience. Don't turn with them. Don't climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns. The Thunderbolt's massive size, once seen as a disadvantage, became an asset. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could reach 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter, even in a vertical dive. That speed could then be converted into altitude during a zoom climb, leaving pursuers far behind. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin, one of America's first aces in Europe, refined this method into what became known as the boom and zoom tactic, though pilots nicknamed it the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. Instead of turning dogfights, P-47 formations climbed to 30,000 feet, well above the Luftwaffe's effective ceiling. When German fighters appeared below, the Thunderbolts rolled inverted and dove, reaching speeds that made accurate defensive fire impossible. At the bottom of these dives, their 8 heavy machine guns unleashed a storm of bullets. Survivors described it as flying into a wall of lead. The combined firepower created a lethal convergence zone. Aircraft hit within it didn't just fall apart, they disintegrated. The true demonstration of American firepower came on August 17, 1943, during the twin raids on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, the deepest bombing missions into Germany at that time. This operation exposed both the Thunderbolt's limitation, its short range even with drop tanks, and its devastating effectiveness when used correctly. Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, spotted a group of Messerschmitt Bf-110s forming to attack B-17 bombers with heavy cannons and rockets. The twin-engine German destroyers, powerful but clumsy, were designed for bomber interception. Schilling's 4 Thunderbolts dove from 28,000 feet to attack. Unteroffizier Heinrich Roth, a surviving gunner from one of the Bf-110s, later recalled in interrogation, "The American fighters came down like hammers from the sky. I opened fire at 800 meters. Good hits, I saw the rounds strike the wing, but the P-47 didn't even flinch. Then he fired. The aircraft ahead of us just disintegrated, wings ripped off, the fuselage shredded into pieces. In seconds, it was gone. In less than a minute, 8 Bf-110s were destroyed. The Luftwaffe had never encountered such concentrated firepower. Each Thunderbolt carried 425 rounds per gun, 3,400 in total, nearly 900 pounds of ammunition. At the typical convergence distance of 300 yards, All 8 guns focused into a 6-foot wide zone, sending over 100 projectiles per second at nearly 3,000 feet per second. The ammunition mix itself showed American industrial might: armor-piercing incendiary, incendiary tracer, and standard ball rounds, arranged to both penetrate and ignite. Lieutenant Colonel Francis "Gabby" Gabreski, who became America's top ace in Europe with 28 victories, summarized it best: "When you hit them with all 8, they don't just go down, they explode. I saw a 109 split clean in half, the tail one way, the wings another. The pilot never knew what hit him." By September 1943, the Luftwaffe faced a new and terrifying reality. The P-47's performance actually improved with altitude, while theirs declined. Its turbo-supercharged double Wasp engine maintained full power up to 30,000 feet, whereas German fighters, relying on single- or two-stage mechanical superchargers, saw their performance fade rapidly above 25,000 feet. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most accomplished fighter aces with 206 confirmed victories, met his end on October 8, 1943. Leading Jägerschwader 1 against a formation of B-17s at 28,000 feet over Bremen, Philipp found his Focke-Wulf 190A6 sluggish and unresponsive in the thin air. The BMW 801 engine, strong at lower altitudes, struggled to breathe nearly 6 miles above the ground. When P-47 Thunderbolts from the 56th Fighter Group dove on his unit from 32,000 feet, the German formation was left completely exposed. Robert Johnson, now a seasoned combat pilot on his path to becoming an ace, spotted Philipp's distinctively painted Focke-Wulf from his position at 31,000 feet. His combat report was brief and precise. Opened fire at 300 yards, 30-degree deflection. Observed strikes across fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. Philipp's death sent a shockwave through the Luftwaffe. If one of their finest, a veteran of more than 500 missions across both eastern and western fronts, couldn't survive against the Thunderbolt, what hope did ordinary pilots have? The German High Command quickly ordered a detailed assessment of the P-47's capabilities. The report delivered to Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring in November 1943 was deeply concerning. It revealed that the Thunderbolt could reach altitudes above 42,000 feet, higher than any German fighter could manage. Its dive speed approached the sound barrier. The plane's armor included a 3/8-inch steel plate behind the pilot, half-inch bulletproof glass in the windscreen, and reinforced protection around the engine. Most troubling was its rugged construction, able to endure damage that would destroy multiple conventional fighters and still return safely. By January 1944, a new version of the P-47 was arriving in England, transforming its reputation from ridicule to respect. The P-47D-22 came equipped with a Hamilton Standard hydromatic propeller with 13-foot paddle blades. These broad blades gripped the air like giant oars, dramatically improving performance. Earlier Thunderbolts climbed at a modest 2,200 feet per minute at sea level, but the new version could reach 3,000 feet per minute, matching or even surpassing German fighters at most altitudes. The massive propeller also improved acceleration, allowing the Thunderbolt to gain energy quickly in level flight. Heinz Nock of Jägerschwader 11, a veteran with over 200 combat missions, encountered the upgraded Thunderbolts during a bomber interception near Hanover in February 1944. In his combat diary, he wrote, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We bounced to formation near Hanover, expecting our usual advantage. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to disengage, they followed us to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart. Nothing left but smoke and fragments. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." The paddle-blade propeller did more than improve performance, it changed the Thunderbolt's sound entirely. The roar produced as the blade tips reached supersonic speeds could be heard for miles. German ground troops soon learned to identify the aircraft by this deep, ominous rumble. They began calling it Donnerschlag, thunderclap. By March 1944, P-47s equipped with external fuel tanks could escort bombers deep into German territory. The typical configuration carried two 108-gallon wing tanks or a 75-gallon belly tank, extending range beyond 1,000 miles. Thanks to the new propeller, the aircraft maintained strong performance even when loaded. Thunderbolts could drop their tanks and immediately engage the enemy on equal terms. The Luftwaffe's response was to focus their attacks on the bombers, hoping to inflict enough losses to halt the American daylight offensive. But to reach the bombers, German pilots had to pass through the Thunderbolt escort screen, a mission that became increasingly suicidal. Many Luftwaffe veterans developed a reluctant respect, even fear, for the large American fighters. Major Gunther Röhl, one of Germany's top aces with 275 victories, most on the Eastern Front, survived a fierce encounter with P-47s on March 6, 1944, though he was badly wounded. In a later interview, he recalled, "We saw them above us, big shapes against the sun." Someone joked, "Here come the flying pigs." No one was laughing 30 seconds later. They came down like an avalanche, faster than we could react. The first pass destroyed 3 of our planes instantly, reduced to burning wrecks. Their guns didn't fire in bursts like ours, they unleashed continuous streams of fire. Getting caught in that meant instant death. The escort missions also revealed another Thunderbolt advantage: endurance. While German fighters burned through fuel at high power, the big American radials could cruise efficiently at altitude. Thunderbolts remained with bomber formations for hours, rotating between high and low cover while still retaining fuel for combat and the return flight. When the P-51 Mustang arrived in greater numbers by spring 1944 to handle long-range escort duties, P-47 units shifted focus toward ground attack, a role in which they became the most feared aircraft in the German arsenal. This transition began in earnest in April 1944 as the Allies prepared for the invasion of France. The Thunderbolt's 8 heavy machine guns proved devastating against ground targets. Its standard armor-piercing incendiary rounds could penetrate the top armor of most German vehicles, while its volume of fire could obliterate softer targets within seconds. A 2-second burst placed 160 half-inch rounds into an area the size of a truck. Equipped with bombs and rockets, the P-47 evolved into a true multi-role weapon. The D-25 variant could carry 2 1,000-pound bombs under its wings and a 500-pound bomb under the fuselage, equivalent to the payload of early war medium bombers. Later versions added zero-length rocket mounts for up to 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, each with the destructive force of a 105 mm artillery shell. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzergrenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign, experienced P-47 attacks firsthand. They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying, engines roaring, rockets screaming, and then the hammering of their heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist, 20 vehicles reduced to burning wrecks in a single pass. The psychological effect on the men was immense. We called them Jabos, fighter bombers, but these were something more. They were flying artillery with the precision of marksmen. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, the Luftwaffe discovered just how completely the balance of power had shifted. Over 500 P-47s provided air cover for the invasion, creating an impenetrable shield over the beaches. German aircraft that attempted to reach the area were decimated. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of Jägerschwader II, one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day, later reported, "The sky belonged to the Americans." Thunderbolts filled the air from sea level to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn, 12 fighters from our group. I was the only one to return. They were waiting at every altitude. You couldn't climb over them or dive beneath them. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain. In the weeks after D-Day, Thunderbolts devastated German transport and logistics in broad daylight. The statistics were staggering. In June alone, 9th Air Force P-47s destroyed 651 locomotives, 3,847 trucks, 512 tanks and armored vehicles, and 4,553 horse-drawn wagons. The Wehrmacht was forced to move only at night, crippling its ability to respond to Allied advances. The Germans tried everything to counter the Thunderbolt threat, reinforcing armor, deploying more anti-aircraft guns, and improving camouflage. None of it worked. The P-47's unmatched combination of speed, armor, and firepower made it nearly invincible. Even the deadly 88mm flak guns struggled to track the fast, low-flying attackers. While dominating Europe, the P-47 was simultaneously proving itself in the Pacific. The 348th Fighter Group, operating out of New Guinea, found that the Thunderbolt's durability and range made it ideal for the vast distances of the Pacific War. Colonel Neil Kirby, commander of the 348th, developed new tactics tailored to the theater. On October 11, 1943, Kirby led 4 P-47s against 40 Japanese aircraft over WWII, personally shooting down 6 enemy planes in a single mission, an achievement that earned him the Medal of Honor. Japanese pilots, used to light and agile American fighters, were unprepared for the P-47's unmatched blend of durability and firepower. Ace Saburo Sakai, who faced Thunderbolts over New Guinea, later admitted, "We called them monsters. Our 20mm cannon, which could destroy a P-40 with a few hits, seemed useless. I fired dozens of rounds into one Thunderbolt and it kept flying. Their return fire was terrifying, streams of heavy bullets that shredded aircraft apart." The P-47N, developed specifically for the Pacific, featured expanded fuel capacity through wet wings holding 93 gallons each, extending its range to over 2,300 miles. This model would eventually escort B-29 bombers to Japan, proving that the short-range fighter of 1943 had evolved into a true long-distance powerhouse. Perhaps the final proof of the Thunderbolt's evolution came in its encounters with German jet fighters. The Messerschmitt Me 262, capable of 540 miles per hour, should have been untouchable for any propeller-driven plane. But Thunderbolt pilots discovered 2 opportunities to engage them: during takeoff and landing, when jets were slow and exposed, and in steep dives from high altitude. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group became one of the first pilots to down an Me 262 in a P-47. Diving from 28,000 feet, Meyer's Thunderbolt reached nearly 500 miles per hour, fast enough to catch the jet in level flight. Confident in his superior speed, the German pilot never saw the diving P-47 until Meyer opened fire from 400 yards. His report stated, "The enemy aircraft disintegrated under fire. Both engines and large fuselage sections separated. No parachute observed." The concentrated impact of 8.50 caliber guns proved more lethal against jets than expected. By early 1945, the advanced P-47M variant entered service specifically to counter German jets and V-1 flying bombs. With water methanol injection boosting power to 2,800 horsepower and improved aerodynamics, these Thunderbolts could reach 470 miles per hour in level flight at 30,000 feet, fast enough to challenge even jet aircraft under certain conditions. Major George Bostwick, commander of the 63rd Fighter Squadron, shot down 2 Me-262s in March 1945. His tactical report emphasized firepower over speed. "The jets are faster, but they can't turn or take damage. One burst from our guns tears them apart. They have to slow down to attack bombers. That's when we strike." The scale of American industrial power became clear during Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's desperate New Year's Day offensive on January 1, 1945. Nearly 900 German fighters, many flown by their remaining veteran pilots, attacked Allied airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands. At Y-34 airfield near Metz, home to the 365th Fighter Group, the attack initially succeeded, destroying 22 Thunderbolts on the ground. A captured German pilot, seeing the wreckage, mocked his captors. "What do you think of that?" Major George Brooking replied calmly, pointing to the maintenance crews already clearing the debris. "By tomorrow, we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" Within 48 hours, the flight line was filled with brand new P-47D-40s flown in from England. The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and 213 pilots in the operation, losses they could never recover. The Americans lost 134 aircraft across all targeted bases, all replaced within a week. The numbers told the larger story of inevitable defeat. Republic Aviation produced 15,683 Thunderbolts during the war, more than any other American fighter. At peak output, the Farmingdale factory in Long Island completed one every hour. The Evansville plant in Indiana, built on farmland in 1942, produced 500 aircraft per month by 1944. Each P-47D required over 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of wiring, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, and 300 pounds of rubber. Its engine alone contained 2,400 precision-machined components. Yet American workers, many of them women who had never seen an airplane before the war, assembled these complex machines with remarkable accuracy, often exceeding peacetime standards. The scale of logistics was staggering. Every P-47 sortie required about 3,400 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition. By mid-1944, with hundreds of Thunderbolts flying daily missions, consumption exceeded 10 million rounds per month. The Lake City Arsenal in Missouri alone produced 30 million rounds monthly, each manufactured to exacting tolerances to ensure flawless performance. Fuel demand was equally immense. Each Thunderbolt burned roughly 100 gallons of fuel per hour in normal flight and up to 300 in combat using water injection. By late 1944, the 9th Air Force consumed over 25 million gallons of aviation fuel every month, all shipped across the Atlantic in mass-produced tankers. Even more impressive than the hardware was the scale of pilot training. By 1944, the U.S. was graduating 30,000 pilots a year from advanced programs, more than Germany produced throughout the entire war. Each Thunderbolt pilot completed at least 400 hours of flight training before combat, including 100 hours in advanced fighter aircraft. By contrast, many late-war German pilots entered combat with less than 100 hours total. The difference showed in battle. American pilots arrived in Europe already skilled in formation flying, instrument navigation, and gunnery. They trained using captured German aircraft and studied detailed manuals that most Luftwaffe pilots never saw. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, who arrived in England in September 1944, recalled, "I had 420 hours in my logbook, including 75 in the P-47. I'd fired at towed targets, practiced deflection shooting, and reviewed gun camera footage. On my first mission, I knew exactly what to do." The German pilot I fought probably had half my experience. It wasn't even close. In March 1945, Oberstleutnant Joseph Priller, the same man who had mocked the P-47 as a pregnant cow 2 years earlier, was interviewed for a morale campaign. His unfiltered comments were deemed too discouraging for publication. "The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever built. Its weapons never jam or overheat. It carries bombs like a medium bomber, fires rockets like artillery, and still fights like a true fighter. But beyond the machine, it represents something greater, limitless American production. They lose 10 and build 20. We lose 1, and it's gone forever. Their pilots are better trained than our instructors. They have fuel, ammunition, and parts. We have only courage. And courage without resources is just delayed defeat." By April 1945, the Luftwaffe was a shell of its former self. Fuel shortages grounded most aircraft. Experienced pilots were dead or captured, and airfields lay in ruins. Even with planes and fuel, the odds were hopeless. P-47s controlled every altitude, from ground level to 40,000 feet. Feldwebel Klaus Brechtender, one of Germany's last trainee pilots, flew a single combat mission before the war's end. His encounter with Thunderbolts over Leipzig lasted just 12 seconds. They came diving from above, 4 Thunderbolts in perfect formation. I tried to turn, but they were too fast. The leader fired from 500 meters. My plane shook violently, then exploded. I bailed out and watched as they wiped out my entire unit, 6 fighters gone in under a minute. The psychological toll was immense. German pilots developed what doctors called Jabo fever, stress symptoms triggered simply by reports of Thunderbolts nearby. Veterans who had faced Spitfires and Hurricanes without fear became physically ill before P-47 missions. Ground troops panicked at the sound of the approaching roar, knowing survival depended on finding cover immediately. The final statistics of P-47 operations were staggering. In Europe, 3,752 enemy aircraft destroyed in air combat, 3,315 destroyed on the ground, 86,000 railcars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, 68,000 trucks, and 60,000 horse-drawn vehicles. In the Pacific, 697 Japanese aircraft downed in combat, 150 destroyed on the ground, along with over 1,500 vehicles and 150 locomotives. The 9th Air Force alone, largely equipped with P-47s, flew over 213,000 sorties, dropped 120,000 tons of bombs, fired 135 million rounds, and launched 60,000 rockets. Thunderbolt units achieved a 4.6 to 1 kill ratio in air combat while maintaining the lowest loss rate of any Allied fighter bomber. Behind those numbers lay a heavy price. The Luftwaffe lost around 28,000 pilots in combat against Western Allied forces, many to concentrated Thunderbolt gunfire. Each represented years of training Germany could no longer replace. By war's end, the average German pilot had fewer than 30 combat hours. The average P-47 pilot had over 200. Captured German records from 1945 revealed their evolving assessment of the Thunderbolt. April 1943, large, unmaneuverable, minimal threat except in dives. December 1943, high-altitude performance exceptional. Firepower increasingly concerning. June 1944, dominant fighter bomber. Devastating firepower. Extremely hard to destroy. March 1945, best fighter bomber of the war. Unmatched combination of strength, armament, and pilot quality. Direct engagement, unsustainable. In 1985, at a reunion in Phoenix, former German and American pilots met in peace. When asked about the P-47, General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, once head of the Luftwaffe's fighter arm, reflected, "We made a mistake in 1943. We saw that big, heavy fighter and laughed. We said the Americans built a bomber and called it a fighter. We were wrong. They built an American fighter, one based on production, firepower, and endurance. In a war of attrition, the aircraft that can take punishment and keep fighting wins." And they were right. After the war, Galland flew a captured P-47 himself. The power was immense. It climbed as if pulled upward. The cockpit was comfortable, visibility perfect, controls precise. It was a pilot's aircraft wrapped in armor. But what truly impressed me was realizing they built over 15,000 of them while fighting a two-ocean war. Each required an engine more complex than anything we produced, yet they built them faster than we could build simple fighters. That's when I knew we never had a chance. German pilots had nicknamed its guns Roosevelt's piano, for the rhythmic thunder of their fire. Once heard, it was unforgettable. Many never heard it twice. The P-47 Thunderbolt didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe, it erased it. It embodied American industrial philosophy, brute force engineering backed by limitless resources. Every part was overbuilt, overpowered, and over-engineered. Its wing spars could support 40,000 pounds, 3 times its loaded weight. The engine mount endured 12 gs. The control cables were doubled for redundancy, and its ammunition feeds used electric boosters to prevent jams during hard maneuvers. Even the .50 caliber guns were individually heated, charged, and synchronized, firing within a precisely tuned convergence zone adjustable from 150 to 400 yards. Some German veterans later claimed the Thunderbolt won through quantity, not quality, but combat data told a different story. When numbers were even, P-47s still prevailed. Its heavy machine guns, often dismissed as inferior to cannon, proved more reliable and lethal in real combat. Gun camera analysis showed why. Cannon shells required pinpoint accuracy and had limited ammo, while the P-47's guns created a dense field of fire that almost guaranteed hits. At standard ranges, a 2-second burst put 20 rounds into a target, more than enough to destroy it. The .50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary rounds used delayed fuses to ensure penetration before detonation, burning at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to ignite aluminum airframes. German 20mm shells, though powerful, often exploded on impact, causing visible but less fatal damage. The P-47 Thunderbolt remains the heaviest single-engine fighter ever mass-produced. Its empty weight exceeded 10,000 pounds, heavier than some twin-engine aircraft. Its engine produced more power than entire bomber formations of World War I, and its guns delivered the firepower of an infantry platoon. Built by the thousands, flown by young pilots, and maintained by rapidly trained mechanics, the Jug transformed from a target of ridicule to a weapon of fear. Within 2 years, it became the Luftwaffe's most dreaded opponent. At the U.S. Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, a restored P-47D stands today among other legendary fighters. Beside it, a small display case holds a strip of gun camera film showing a Focke-Wulf 190 disintegrating under its fire. Below it, a quote from a captured German pilot reads, "We laughed when we first saw them, fat, ugly fighters that couldn't turn or climb. We stopped laughing when we realized they didn't need to. They just pointed their guns, and you ceased to exist. The laughter died with our comrades." The P-47 Thunderbolt entered the war as a joke, and ended it as a symbol of total air dominance. Between those 2 points, 8 synchronized Browning machine guns rewrote the rules of aerial warfare and silenced the Luftwaffe forever. By May 1945, there were no German pilots left to laugh. The thunder had spoken, and the skies belonged to America.